We now continue with part 3 of chapter 30. With his hostage in tow, Will stepped next to Emily. "Nicely done," he said, staring across the plaza at the last two intruders, who continued their measured advance toward them. "Thanks," she replied, also eyeing the strangers. "What do you think they're up to? Why are they waiting?" Perhaps they were afraid, but their manner suggested otherwise. Will sensed no fear in them. "Here, take him," he said, passing the prisoner back to her and taking a step forward. The two men stopped and began conversing. They then separated, one heading north, the other south, walking slowly at first, but steadily quickening their pace. Breaking into a trot, they each leaned forward, touching their hands to the ground, and began running on all fours. Then, as Will watched in horror, they transformed from men into large wolf-like creatures, clothed in thick, black fur. Emily gasped, and the drifter she held began to cackle. "What are they?" Will asked. "I don't know," she answered. As the two beasts neared the north and south walls, respectively, they began veering toward the couple, apparently intending to attack them from opposite directions. "You've met your match now, boy," muttered their prisoner. And for a gut-wrenching moment, Will wondered if he might be right. "He has no match here," Emily asserted, with an air of complete confidence, immediately calming the fear that had begun to invade his mind. Will realized that their beastly form, though frightening on the surface, gave these intruders no more advantage than the sword wielded by the drifter he'd sent flying. For, however powerful their bodies or sharp their teeth, they moved within his world, an environment under his control. The creature, coming at them from the north to his left, was picking up speed as it angled toward them. Will hesitated to use a blast of wind to stop its charge. Though there were no townspeople directly in the way, the beast might be blown through a door or window, even a wall of one of the shops, endangering those who'd taken refuge inside. For a moment, he considered simply taking them on, face to face, pitting his fortified body against their lethal fangs. But there were two of them, and while he was engaged with one, the other might go for Emily. Will then recalled his leap across the ravine, how he changed the structure of the ground to soften his landing. Focusing his attention on the area in the animal's path, he imagined that the stone pavement, though solid in appearance, was liquid, thick like wet cement or quicksand in substance. When its legs hit the altered surface, the ground gave way, and the fearsome being fell into the trap. As it frantically struggled to move through the viscous pool, Will transformed the pavement again, returning it to its solid form, encasing the animal's four legs and most of its lower body in stone. Will quickly set the same trap for the second beast, which continued its charge from the other direction. However, having seen what had befallen its companion, it suddenly leapt into the air. As the creature descended, it transformed again, sprouting large wings, black and leathery, like those of a bat. Just before it touched the ground, it extended its wings to the side and thrust down, soaring straight up and eluding capture. It flew high into the air, then folded its wings close to its body and dove at the couple. Though shocked, Will kept his wits and reacted swiftly, altering the air through which the beast passed, turning it to the consistency of honey and ensnaring the animal in the sky. Emily breathed an audible sigh of relief. "There, you see," she said, admonishing their hostage. With both creatures now caught, Will considered how best to finish them off. They were immobilized, but not subdued, and he feared that either or both might suddenly change their form again into who knows what this time. As he stared up at the strange animal struggling to move its wings through the dense atmosphere, Will saw a flash of lightning in the dark clouds high above it. And he wondered, could he bring down a bolt from the heavens? Could he wield the weapon of Zeus? Yes, he thought, it was within his power. Will hesitated, however, for the winged beast was only 50 feet above their heads. What if he missed? And even if he scored a direct hit on his target, the amount of energy released in the blast would be considerable, perhaps lethal to all of them at this distance. But he saw a solution. He gathered air in his lungs and blew, liberating the trapped being from its invisible bonds and sending it up into the angry sky. Like a tetherless kite caught in an updraft, the creature spiraled higher and higher until it nearly reached the black clouds that hung above the town. Then there was a flash, and a crooked, white-hot bolt ripped across the sky, striking the beast and vaporizing it on contact. A moment later, the sound of the explosion reached their ears. First, a sharp crack, then a tremendous boom, followed by a deep, rolling rumble, which he felt underfoot more than heard. Now it was their prisoner who gasped, and Emily who chuckled. "Nice shot," she said. "Thanks," Will replied. Just then, the door of the tavern opened, and Lily appeared. She stood in the doorway and stared at the terrifying animal half buried in the pavement. Will expected her to retreat inside, but instead, she began marching directly toward the creature, coming at it from behind, while holding what appeared to be a fireplace poker in her hand. Once within range, Lily took her weapon in both hands, raised it above her head, and struck the monster on the back of its skull. It let out a roar, then twisted its head around, trying to snap at her. Undeterred by the frightening show of teeth, she began raining blows down on the animal's back and head. As its ferocious snarls turned to sorrowful cries, Will began to feel pity for the being. But he reminded himself that this was no defenseless beast, mindless and acting out of instinct. This was a man, hired to invade his home, tear him to shreds, and deliver the girl he loved to a madman. He had freely chosen to enter into this fight, and now he was facing the consequences. Still, he thought, it was time to put an end to this. With Lily so close to the creature, he could not hurl thunderbolts, nor use any long-range weapon without endangering her. And yet, though it appeared that the battered animal was the only threat remaining, Will was reluctant to stray too far from Emily's side. Why doesn't it just leave? He wondered aloud. Maybe it can't, said Emily. Did its altered form keep it from slipping into the darkness and escaping? Was this one of the rules? Lily, he shouted. She held back the blow she was about to deliver and looked at Will. Move away, he yelled to her. Lily looked down at the beast, took one last swing, then backed away, breathing hard. What are you going to do? Emily asked him. Blast it? Not unless I have to, he replied. I'm going to free it. Free it, she said. Will took a dozen steps forward and motioned for Lily to move farther away. He then focused on the area surrounding the animal and changed the consistency of the ground again, back to a liquid, but much thinner than before, like muddy water rather than thick mud. The creature instantly sank into the pool, almost slipping below the surface, then bobbed back up and began paddling its legs, scrambling for the shore. Lily continued backing up until she reached the tavern entrance, where she stood, leaning against the heavy door, one hand on the latch, the other holding the blood-stained poker. The weary animal pulled itself up onto solid ground, and as it lay there, wet and wounded, taking deep, labored breaths, it began transforming, slowly taking the shape of a man. Will stood ready, willing to risk bringing a thunderbolt down into the square if his adversary, as beast or man, showed any sign of aggression. When the last of its dark fur had dissolved away, the man sat up and tried to stand. Clearly in pain, he wobbled for a moment and dropped down to one knee. He took a breath, wincing as the air filled his lungs, then steadied himself and rose to his feet. Staring at Will, the haggard outlaw came to attention, standing erect with his arms at his side, and bowed respectfully, acknowledging his defeat. Then, after receiving a civil nod in return from Will, the intruder took his leave. Emily let out a cheer. It appeared the battle had been won. Will wasn't ready to celebrate, however. Not yet. Perhaps it was only the presence of their captive, but he still sensed unwelcome foreign vibrations within his world. And until Wysteria was free of them, he couldn't let down his guard. "We did it," Emily cried. "That's the last of them." "Except for him," she said, referring to their detainee. Will looked at Lily, who was still visibly shaken by her encounter with the monstrous creature. "Are you okay?" he called to her. Managing a smile, she nodded. "Thank you," he said. She returned a slight curtsy, then opened the door to the tavern and went inside. As he turned to rejoin Emily, Will felt a flutter run through his body. Now what, he thought? Were reinforcements coming? Before he could identify the source of this new intrusion, he saw Emily point toward the center of the square. "It's Charlotte," she exclaimed.